Hi, everybody. My name's Angie Viscianen. I'm the founder of Leg Up Legal. We provide a mentoring program to connect pre-law students to lawyers for mentoring. And we started doing these Zoom meetups for prospective law students, current law students, and lawyers to start interacting and getting to know each other during COVID-19. It's been a very interesting 60 days, and we started doing these meetups back in March. First meetup I had like maybe 10 people on, and then it's grown and grown and grown, and some of these we even have like 100 people on, so I never know who's going to show up. But thank you so much for being here today, and I have a very special guest with me today. Amy Osteen is the founder of OutsideCLO PC, and she has held a bunch of different roles in her legal career. She's been in-house, been general counsel, been chief legal officer for a number of different companies, and now she runs her own firm that actually does fractional GC and fractional CLO services. So I'll let her take it away and tell you all about it.
Sure. Hi, guys. Thank you for having me on. Basically, I would like to be able to say there was a ton of thought and process that went into what I'm doing and why, but ultimately it came down to, I went to a chief legal officer convention in Las Vegas, lots of fun. But one of the CLOs there had a very similar background to me, and I started out as a patent attorney just for a few years. Very quickly realized that was not a personality suit. But I was asking him, he was the CLO for Chipotle. And I said, how did you land Chipotle with your background? It's just kind of seems like a weird fit. And he said, I got laid off from my company. It was the middle of, the financial recession. And I looked around and I decided I didn't really want to go work for a law firm. There wasn't a company that I just was like, I'm a perfect fit for that. And he said, I was at a point in my career where I'd been doing this long enough to where I could take maybe 3 or 4 smaller companies and, do that, just be their GC. So each one of those companies called him their general counsel. And then he said, then Chipotle just blew up, started doing really well. Now they've had some issues, since then, but I just remember that was stuck in my head for so long. And so my background is a little odd, but I always, when I'm talking to students or people in law school, even young attorneys, and I say, what do you want to do and why? Usually everyone has some, I think I want to do this. And one of the pieces of advice I give is just be flexible. Some of the best opportunities I've had were things I never thought in a million years I would be doing. Some of the best things that have happened in my career might have started out, something that was like, what? Oh no. Take, for instance, this is horrible, but I entered the legal practice in year 2000. So I was representing all tech companies. September 11th happened, and to say it was kind of similar to this period is probably, it's different, but the same kind of anxiety, the, not really knowing. At that point, we thought we might be going to war. That all of a sudden businesses were being shut down, people were staying at home. There was that same sort of anxiety that I'm seeing a lot now, but some people chose to make that time. I was a patent attorney, but I looked around my law firm and there was a partner that was doing insurance law. I didn't know anything about insurance law. Most people didn't want to work for him because, quite honestly, his rates were a lot lower. But, I could kind of see the writing on the wall. So I walked into his office and said, hey, if you need any help, I know I'm not a litigator, but I'm happy to learn. And he looked at me and he's like, you're the first one. And I was just waiting to see who was going to be the first one. And so I started doing that. And as a patent attorney, I was doing insurance defense but I got tons of experience for about a year, trials, depositions. And then I found out, wow, I'm really actually good at this litigation thing. And so through that, basically I was recruited into an investment bank to help manage their litigation portfolio, which was way cool because I was a third-year attorney and there's probably no way they should have given me that much responsibility, but I was young and dumb and I thought I knew a lot more than I actually did.
I love that you're saying that, Amy, because I think a lot of people sometimes think like, maybe I'm not ready for these opportunities. Like when something comes your way, like you're applying for a gazillion things and at some point you get offers and you're like, oh crap, I didn't think they were actually going to offer this to me. But then, it's, do I decide I'm going to take this by the reins, or do I just sit out and say, no, I'm not quite ready for this yet? But so I'm so glad that you said like, yeah, I was a little intimidated at first and they probably shouldn't have given this to me, but I totally took on the opportunity. Can you tell us a little bit about, kind of what did you do since you felt like you were in over your head? Did you have some people that you could contact that could help you, who could mentor you and make sure that you were able to come along?
Sure. So I was, I know that a lot of attorneys can't say this, and for that, I feel sorry for them, because one of the biggest things is finding who you're going to be working with and for is just as important as the work you're doing and where you're working. I was incredibly lucky to have basically bosses that were absolutely amazing. And they really were firm in that, it was a complex, working for an investment bank for 10 years, our subsidiaries were Houlihan Lokey, we had Mariner Investment, Red Capital Markets, and I didn't have a business background. I had an engineering background. And so one of my main mentors, he would say, Amy, you're doing really great, but you need to get to know the business better. You need to get to know, you need to be the subject matter expert on these things that you're doing. And it wasn't the legal stuff that I had to learn. He was like, you're doing all of that fine, but you need to learn the business, because without learning the business, you can't really do the legal stuff as well as, you should be able to. And so I think that I was so incredibly lucky to have mentors that basically always encouraged me to be constantly learning. And as soon as I got one thing, they also kind of knew my personality. So they moved me around a lot. They were like, Amy's ADD is going crazy. She's kind of figured out the real estate thing. Now let's move her to the bond desk. Okay, now she's figured out the bond desk. Now let's move her someplace else. And for me, if you're not the kind of person that likes to be in one specific area forever, then I just, the biggest piece of advice I got was learn the business of whatever you're wanting to do, and then start exploring working with different sections, working with different types of people, because the more well-rounded you are with the business, the better lawyer you are, because you can spot things that maybe a lawyer that just does contracts can't spot. And doing the litigation gave me the ability to then, when I started doing more corporate work, I don't litigate anymore. I can manage litigation, but I haven't actually, well, I say that last year I did one small trial, but I was a nervous freaking wreck. So I just said, that's it, done. But
do you think being in-house allows you more flexibility to move around into all those different areas as opposed to being in a firm? In a firm, don't they kind of try to pin you into like certain areas and make you become a specialist in those areas, or?
Yes, but it kind of depends on the firm and it depends on the company. So if I were a law student and you have to know your personality. If you know that you just want to do corporate finance and that is your personality, then, you know, and you're that kind of person that will take something and really drill down on it, and that's all you want to do. By means, get to know corporate finance inside and out, get to know the business side, get to know the lawyers that do corporate finance. If you're someone that just doesn't quite know what you want to do yet, and until you've actually practiced law, you kind of don't really truly know. I would just, you know, say get as much learning as you possibly can, because you don't know if you're going to like labor law. You might love labor law. I deal with it because I have to. But, you know, there are some real downsides of labor law, which is you're usually the person that fires people. And so sometimes that's just not a lot of fun. But, you know, getting a really well-rounded, asking to work. I mean, I went into that guy's office and said, can I work for you? Like going to different partners at different law firms, asking, can I shadow you on some calls? I've had law students actually call and say, hey, can I just shadow you on some of these web calls that we're doing? And, you know, of course I talk to the client and say, hey, you know, I've got, and I always say an intern, you know, I've got an intern who wants to just learn. Do you mind if he or she's on this Zoom call? And 99% of the time, we're not talking about anything that's incredibly confidential. So they're always like, oh yeah, and they get a kick out of it. They think it's great. And it's a good way to, I guarantee you most lawyers would have no problem with that. And it's a great way to kind of see how lawyers that kind of do this a lot, talk to their clients, interact with their clients, how they ask questions, what are they perking up at, you know, what are the clients asking them? And so I would encourage anybody on this call, feel free to reach out to me on that respect. If you want to just join a Zoom call, some are much more interesting than others. But you know, that's a good way just to learn about all the different areas. There are so many different areas that you don't even think about during law school that you go, wow, you can make a living doing this. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think a lot of students are concerned about confidentiality issues, so they're not willing to ask for shadowing opportunities. And yeah, in like other industries like the medical industry, shadowing is way more common than in the legal industry. So there are some times that lawyers may push back if it's a call where they are going to be, you know, discussing something very private. But you could always ask the lawyers also to shadow them for opportunities of things like non-billable opportunities that they're doing. So all lawyers will usually do some sort of business development or non-billable opportunities where they'll go speak at presentations or do continuing legal education presentations, and you can always ask if you can help them work on those with them. There's still great opportunities to learn from those lawyers just by interacting with them and hearing, like Amy said, you know, what are they talking about? What kind of questions are they asking? How are the lawyers engaging with each other? All of those are good learning opportunities. So totally cool opportunity. You know, you guys should definitely take advantage and reach out to Amy after this.
Yeah, happy to do that. And then, you know, that's also been one of the best ways to network for jobs. I've never gotten a job through a recruiter, just haven't. All of my opportunities, how I got to the investment bank is I was downstairs at our Benny's Bagels, and the guy behind me was like, why are you here so early? And I said, oh, I've got a hearing. And he happened to be head of litigation at the investment bank. And he was like, oh, wow, you're the only person here in the building. And I was like, yeah, I got a lot to do. And then he gave me his card. And the next thing I knew, I was there for 10 years. So, you know, and I went to a conference and I was working with VMware, and they just in San Francisco, and they happened because we had some mutual portfolio holdings. And, you know, after 10 years and having 2 kiddos and needing to not be on the road so much, somebody there handed me their card and said, hey, we've got a VMware product that's spinning off and it's going in Dallas. Have you ever thought about, you know, not being number 2, but being general counsel? I was like, wow. From Zimbra and VMware, I went to Rug Doctor as their chief legal officer. And when we were selling Zimbra into Synacor, I made a call to an attorney here in town who I know is pretty respected and he knows people. And I said, hey, I'm not saying I'm looking in about 5 weeks, but I might be looking in about 5 weeks. And 2 weeks later, you know, he had forwarded my resume to someone. So every single opportunity I've had has not come from a recruiter. It has come from picking up the phone. It's come from just letting people know that you're available. It's letting people also know where you think your sweet spot is. So if you just say, oh, I like everything and I'll do everything, some lawyers might love that. That's great. But the people, if you kind of have an idea of where your sweet spot is, like who do you think you would be your best fit for? You know, concentrate on those areas. Like if you go, yeah, I really want to do more just general business work, then I would make sure your LinkedIn contacts are CEOs, CFOs, chief operating officers, and general counsel, or AGCs at small to medium-sized businesses. So anyone in the, you know, call it up to $400 million in revenue. And how do you do that? Well, one of you know, my little tricks that I do is, so Crunchbase. If anybody is familiar with Crunchbase, we might have some techies out there that know Crunchbase. If you don't know Crunchbase, it's not a bad way to do some research on the local companies in your area that are raising money. So, because basically Crunchbase, you go on Crunchbase and you can see, the data is not always perfect, but you can see, oh, this company, this startup just raised $10 million. Well, they may be the people that need legal work, right? That could hire a new attorney and that would hire a new attorney straight into a company and take that risk because they can't pay you like the big firms can. But so I would encourage everybody to just research who you think your market is and really get to know their business and reach out to them.
Are there any associations that you're a part of, Amy, for other GCs or CLOs that might be good for them to look into?
You know, ACC is actually really, I think it's probably the largest group that has meetings quite often. So before this, they'd have, you know, monthly happy hours and people really interact with ACC. So that's probably, and it's, you know, it's all over the United States. So, and they have great conferences. That would be a huge thing, I think, but you have, you know, you get what you give. And so if you go to the conference and you just kind of sit there, you're not going to make any friends, you're not going to make any contacts. But if you go to the bar when you're really tired at 6:30 and really all you want to do is have a drink and, you know, watch Netflix or the hotel thing. But, you know, if you go to the bar and have a drink with people and get to know people, you know, that's how I've made some of the best contacts that I have in the industry. One of my best friends is GC of Zappos, and I'll call him up every once in a while and go, hey, what are you doing when you have this issue? You know, when you're practicing law, I think that one of the biggest tips that I ever got was be civil and we're all grown-ups here, but you have to have the no asshole policy. Don't be an asshole, because the many times the opportunities, the cases, the cool things that I was able to do, or the great advice I got, were all from people that had at one time been on the opposite side of me. You know, that is a marketing. It's exactly, if you do a transaction and you're not a jerk, people remember that. And that doesn't mean you give everything. It just means you're just not a jerk. So you go, yeah, I don't really agree with that. Let's revisit that later. Let's knock out what we can all agree on, and then let's do the hard stuff later. Everybody gets that, rather than just arguing and arguing over every little thing. People remember that, and they will give you recommendations, and they will tell people like, oh yeah, she's really good on this. And they're people that I was against, or counterparties to. So that's one of the main things and a lot of people just don't get that. A lot of attorneys think that the more you beat your chest and the louder you are, the more you get done. And I find it's just the opposite.
Have you ever been in a position where you were
anybody ask questions? I would love for any questions you have, because it's been so long since I've been a law student. I don't even remember, but they were the best years. I went to SMU, so I know Eric's on, but I am still, out of my 4 best friends that I have in life, 3 of them I went to law school with. So the people, a lot of times you go to law school with, it's like being in the trenches, and you come out with some of the best friends of your life. So
totally.
It's been a while.
Amy, have you ever been in a position where you were a company's first GC or first chief legal officer? Do you have advice for people? Because I think a lot of junior attorneys are really afraid, like, oh, I need to go out and get some firm experience or get a lot of experience before I can go be a GC somewhere. Do you have any insight as to kind of what's the sweet spot of when you are comfortable enough to do that? Or how do you act when you're the first GC?
Yeah, so at Zimbra, I was the first GC because it spun off. So it was kind of a first role. Everybody had worked for a GC before, but it was a brand new company with a brand new CEO. And so it was very different going from someplace that was huge to someplace that was smaller. I think that one of the things I had to learn was, as a lot of times when you're at a bigger place, you have a lot of leverage when you're operating, as far as, oh, I'm going to ask for this provision and I'm going to get it because it's just the right thing. And I think that when my AGC, I just left Rug Doctor recently, and in really January, February, still working for them off and on, but my AGC is taking over, not the general counsel role, while they're going to be searching, but she's doing all of it. I hired her right out of law school, and I did it through the externship program that SMU had. And she just happened to be so freaking good and so smart that I went, there's no way I'm letting her go to a law firm, no offense, get ruined by a law firm, and then have me retrain her. There are more and more and more general counsel that are thinking that way, because you have to retrain ways of thinking if you come from a law firm. So if I know I only have a certain budget and my choices are start with somebody who's really, really smart coming out of law school that I've seen their work and I know what work they've done, or hire somebody who's a 3rd-year associate that I don't really know their work product, I would always take the baby lawyer, always. And it's just because it's a different way of thinking, and more that never used to happen. It's happening more and more now.
Awesome. We've got a question here in the chat box. How do you jump on opportunities when they're presented?
I'm just real honest. I think my husband says it's probably some kind of form of Asperger's, but I'm really, really honest about what I want and what I'm a good fit for. If an opportunity is presented to me that, for example, a really amazing company contacted me about an amazing role, and I talked to them, I met with the CEO, and at the end of it, I said, I'm not what you want. I'm not going to be good at this very long. I was like, I'll be great at it for about 8 months and then I'll get bored and you're not going to want me. And they just sat there and stared and went, thank God. Are you serious? And I was like, yeah. I was like, this is the kind of person you need. But you know what? I know so-and-so, she's in-house, she's not really happy, but man, this would be right in her wheelhouse. And so I think learning when to turn down opportunities is just as important as knowing when to say yes. I'm general counsel for part-time general counsel, so that's kind of, it's weird what I do, but I'm part-time general counsel for a products company. I'm part-time general counsel for a really cool artificial intelligence tech company. Very, very different. Totally. Oh, and I'm general counsel for a family medical practice. So med mal, I don't do, we have a medical compliance person, but I just do, you know, a lot of the other general stuff, HR, admin type stuff. It's very, very different things. Learning to say yes also, to go, I've never done that, but you know what? I think I could. And if I can't, if I get in and you realize, oh, Amy's just not very good at this, managing a family practice of a doctor, I'd never done anything like that, but it sounded really cool. So also realizing that you need to get up to speed on their industry and not on their dime. So offer, if you're really chasing an industry or you're really chasing a certain type of thing, learn as much as you can and then offer to share some of that information with them, you know, for free, you know, without charging. My billing is very weird. I tell people, and actually I can't say that I did this, invented this. Bill Brennan, who was the GC of Bissell, and when I was at Rug Doctor, Bissell's was, you know, our biggest competitor. We were often in litigation with them, but Bill's also one of my good friends. And we would typically settle our cases over a beer in Grand Rapids, Michigan, outside of the law firms. And he basically is doing a little bit of a similar thing to me, but he's now basically retired, so he's only spending a certain amount of his time. And what he does, and I do it too, is when people say, what are you charging? I say, look, I know what law firms charge for it. This is what this law firm would charge for it. I know when I was a GC, what I would negotiate that down to and what I would expect to be charged for it. And I said, I will charge you 20% off of that. And then if you get it, if you get my bill and you say, Amy, oh gosh, yeah, that I don't think I got enough value for what you gave, then you don't have to pay me. And people are like, what? And my engagement letter pretty much says that. And I said, you know, it's fine, but you don't have to pay me. That doesn't mean I'll continue being your general counsel. But, you know, that's fine. If I'm not a good fit, then great, let's figure that out now. If I'm not giving you the value that you really think you can get, then yeah, like let's go our separate ways. And I think being really honest with people about your strengths and your weaknesses is incredibly important.
Awesome. I actually got a question via email before this presentation from one of the participants. How do you impress during an interview for a CLO type position?
So by the time I got all my general counsel positions, you know, I'd been basically number 2 at a very large company for 10 years. So it was a natural step and progression. I think that the main thing that people want to see in interviews for general counsel and chief legal officers is the ability to multitask. You're essentially an air traffic controller. Can you lead? Are you a jerk? Are you smart enough to be able to, you know, manage the pieces? And that's really important from a GC standpoint. If I were a law student and I were interviewing with a company, with an AGC or a GC, or you're talking to the COO or the CEO, and you're like, I'd love to do some work for your company, I would absolutely follow up. I mean, that is one of the things. Sometimes people don't, you might contact them, you might feel really like, oh, I just had this interview. I don't know, did I blow it? Did I not blow it? I couldn't really tell how I did. They haven't called me back. They haven't emailed me back. 9 times out of 10, when I would do that to people, it wasn't because I didn't like them or I didn't want them. It's just that, you know, I got distracted, got onto something else. And then, you know, when I saw their email pop up, I went, oh yeah, hey, Melanie, you're so right. I'm going to get back with you next week. So I think one of the pieces of advice I would give is just be persistent. Don't be annoying, but be persistent. And the other thing I would do, I have started doing this, and I'll tell you, it kind of cracks me up. I read an article in the Harvard Business Review that talked about the need, and we all hear about self-affirmation. We all hear about it, like blah, blah, blah. But, you know, sometimes this job is hard, right? Sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes you're the one that gets yelled at because you're the person firing, or you're the one making hard decisions, or you're having to be adverse to someone. Make a folder. I have a folder in my Outlook that's called Kick-Ass. It's titled Kick-Ass. And when the Harvard Business Review didn't say title it Kick-Ass, but the whole thought was, when you get good feedback, if somebody you're working with, and this could be while you're in law school, it could be while you're in college, it could be whatever. When you get good feedback on any of your work, put it in that folder so that when times get a little bit tough and you're feeling down, or you're working with a jerk and you're starting to go, oh gosh, is he or she right? And maybe I'm not really good at this. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. You know, kind of go back and look at your kick-ass file and get yourself encouraged again. And then also look at it of, do I see a common theme of what I'm good at, right? And what I found is I saw a common theme of what people were saying that I was really good at. And then I started shaping what I viewed as opportunities based on those strengths, because sometimes you don't really know, you can look at yourself, but you don't really know what other people think that you do, perceive that you do better than other people.
I absolutely love that. That is like priceless advice. And you guys didn't write that down. Like, go write it down, because it's so true. Like, you're going to get to a point, at some point, you're going to be working, and you're like, God, I don't know if I can do this one single more day. And you're just like down, and you don't feel good about yourself. And you're like, you know, how am I ever going to survive practicing for 20 more years of my life? And if you go and look at those things, you're going to realize, oh yeah, there was something that made me drawn to this in the first place. There's a reason why I really enjoy doing what I do. And you're going to see, like, there are people who appreciate you. And yeah, put everything in there. Kudos from anybody, a boss, a friend, you know, a mentor, everything goes into that file. And then look at that file before you go into interviews too. That'll help you, you know, really understand.
Because they ask your streets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you can talk about it, and you can, you know, even use those anecdotes about, you know, these situations where you were put into these situations where you performed well as, you know, as your main stories that you tell during that interview. You know, that's what's really, really powerful, is real concrete examples of times that you knocked it out of the park. You know, that's what you want to show in your interviews. That is great, great advice. That's awesome.
And then also on interviews, you know, talk to other people and find out what they're saying. Like, because sometimes you'll notice really cool stories, and everybody's got some kind of cool story. When I interviewed for the GC position of the tech company, the CEO said, tell me a time in your legal career that was memorable. And I said, memorable. He's like, no, and I don't want like a big deal or anything like that, but an individual time that you still kind of remember the sights, the sounds, what happened. And I had never been asked anything like that. So I was like, and I started laughing. And I said, okay, well, I've got one. And he asked what it was, and I said, you know, I was a young attorney working for the investment bank. We had huge litigation going on with some white shoe law firms in New York. I was living in New York most of the time at that point. But I was wildly, I shouldn't have been taking this deposition, but we were running out of lawyers. It was that big of a case. And so my boss said, okay, Amy, you got to go take this depo. And so I went to one of the largest law firms in New York, and I walked in and I went to the conference room. And when I walked in, I saw 3 guys at the conference table. One I obviously recognized as the deponent, and he was also from a very large bank, and headed one of the biggest sections of this very large bank. And then his 2 partner lawyers at this large firm. And they basically didn't even pay attention to me when I walked in. And so I sat down, I set my laptop up, I saw everything, and I had waved and said hi, and they just ignored me. And then I very quickly realized, because they were going, oh, you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't say this. I realized they thought I was the court reporter. So, you know, I had 2 options. I could I was very clear. I walked in, I disclosed, hi, I'm Amy, you know. I could have gotten really upset and been like, just because I'm a woman, you think I'm the court reporter? Don't you know, blah, blah, blah. I could have done that. Instead, I just finished setting up. And I set up, and they still kept talking. And then all of a sudden, the court reporter walks in. And to see the look on these guys' face, it was just priceless. Because then they looked at me, and I just went, you know, and they realized that I fully disclosed who I was. They completely just thought that there was no way I could be the lawyer. And I didn't get mad, and I let them dig their own hole, which basically was a huge turning point in the case, because I knew exactly where their weaknesses was, because they just told me. So, you know, that was the example that I gave him. It wasn't one of the coolest things that's ever happened to me in my career, but it was memorable. So if it's memorable for you, it might be memorable for someone else. So find your story that is memorable, try it out with people. Say, hey, what do you think of this? People can tell you to tweak your story a little bit, so that when you walk out of the interview, they've seen 10, 15 lawyers that are all really smart, right? And all went to really good law schools, but they'll remember you because what you gave them wasn't so cookie cutter. So that's my piece of advice.
Perfect.
I would always remember those people.
So another question from the chat box: would you say that working for a big law firm and then transitioning to in-house is something common or customary?
Yes, that's how it typically goes.
Okay.
This is not my path. I was at a small law firm. I was at a boutique law firm. I think more and more, and this is something that kind of big law isn't incredibly, they don't talk about a lot, but more and more companies are hiring from boutiques, from smaller firms. They're hiring the lawyer. The big name working at a big name law firm doesn't really matter as much anymore. People care about experience, because used to, people would go to a law firm and they'd stay there forever. But now people jump from law firms so much that there isn't the whole brand loyalty, law firm loyalty isn't there as much. Even if you have a GC that was like, hey, I was at V&E, or I was at, whatever it is, Catton, they may not know anybody there anymore because everybody moved around so much. So I think that in-house, it's becoming much more common to hire out of everyone now, but that wasn't always the case. When I joined, I was an oddball because I came from a boutique law firm. But nowadays, I know tons of lawyers that go in-house that started out at small places.
Awesome. What do you like most about your current role?
So the reason I did my current role is basically after being in-house for 17 years, you think differently than an outside lawyer. And I realized that I also have a tendency to get bored. HR at Rug Doctor, HR reported into me, real estate reported into me, insurance and risk, and international subsidiaries. So it was very much a business type role as well. And I really enjoyed that piece. But I just know my personality, and I know that I need to learn a business inside and out. And so what better way to do it than to learn 3 different types of businesses and be that person where, you know, they just pick up the phone and call you. It also gives me flexibility. And at a certain point in my life, I said, you know, I want to work from Colorado in the summer and not be in Texas where it's 120 degrees. I would love to do that. So my clients, I'm general counsel for a company in New York. I'm general counsel for a company, the doctor's office in Grapevine here, and the tech company here in Dallas. But one of my 3 clients that keeps me busy isn't even here. So they're in New York. Nowadays,
Miracles of technology.
it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Adser, did you have a question you wanted to jump in?
Yes. Hi, Amy. I'm Adser. I'm a pre-law student.
Hi.
So I was wondering, when you said that law firms ruin some law students, like reshaping their patterns of thinking, and then when they go to work in other fields or sectors, you need to retrain them. Can you elaborate more on that? Because I've never heard of that before, like retraining people's patterns of thinking.
Oh yeah, no, it's a totally different way of thinking when you're in-house, because you have to, you're basically running a small business. So when you don't think in time increments, you think in value, and you think in risk analysis. You also, a lawyer, it would be, I'm trying to be careful not to disparage the law profession, but it would drive me nuts when I get on the phone with somebody who was charging me $600 an hour, and they would give me the freaking master of the obvious answer. Like, yes, that is the textbook legal answer. Yes, I get it. Thank you very much. But I can't do that. Well, what do you mean you can't do? For whatever reason, you know, because business happens, right? And you say, I can't do that for this reason or that reason or that reason. And then they kind of get stuck, like, well, but that's the legal answer. And you're like, okay, that's the legal answer. I'm telling you that if that's the legal answer, I have a whole company over here that's going to go freaking under. So get creative, figure out a way that we can, you know, do this. And a lot of times the really good outside counsel can do it. They can get creative and come up with a solution. The ones that are just you know, it was like, okay, I just wasted a lot of money for someone to tell me what I could have researched on freaking Lexus. So it's learning, it's being more business oriented and realizing that sometimes the limitations that come along with a business. And then, you know, for example, an attorney could give you, I would tell, like at Rug Doctor, for example, we had people would sue us for product liability issues. We'd have maybe, call it 50 cases across the United States. And I would make sure I was adamant about, I needed to see all the discovery answers before they went out. And sometimes lawyers would give it to me at the very last second so I wouldn't have time to review it. And then they would be like, well, my other clients don't ask to review this stuff. I mean, I did the interviews, I did this. And one of the things I would say is, you're thinking like an outside counsel, because I have 50 cases that all have the same subject matter or similar subject matter. If you say something in Michigan that I said something different in California. And I don't know, you don't know the California case, just like the California guy doesn't know the Michigan case. If they're all different nowadays with how everything's digital, plaintiffs attorneys can find that. And so if you're thinking of just your little cosm, which sometimes outside law firms do, because that's what they're used to, and you're not thinking of the grand total, you're missing something that could be absolutely devastating for a company. You might have done the right legal thing, but you might tank the company in the process.
That's a great example. Yeah, it is hard because I think when you're at a firm, you do, outside counsels, you guys tend to be hired guns, right? So when you're at a law firm, client comes to you, this is our specific problem, solve. And sometimes you're not aware of the bigger picture of all the other things that are going on. So, for example, when I was working in intellectual property, sometimes you would be helping the client file a trademark here in the US, but maybe they're a multinational company or international company that has client or has trademarks everywhere, right? You have to worry about the same thing. If they've decided to take some strategies with their trademark portfolio in other countries, it may impact your strategy here in the US. And so as the US counsel, you still have to be cognizant of what's going on with the greater picture. And that can be very, very difficult, a lesson to learn, especially as a young associate, because you're often getting things way down the line. So the client gives it to your partner and the partner gives it to your senior associate, and then the senior associate might give it to you. You're just like, so, in such a low level of the totem pole, you may not be seeing the greater picture. So very, very good point. What else, what other questions do you guys have? I mean, feel free, jump in, chime on in.
I just thought that was a really, really great point about the big firms. I work for an agency that's pretty big, but I see the same thing. And I kind of call it, sometimes if you're with a big agency, it's like the attorneys grow up in diapers. Yeah, I'm on the phone. Well, that's my kids, sorry. But they have box check and protocol, and it's exactly like Angie said, where you're almost like a Burger King checkout person versus being the person running Burger King. You get very used to the protocol and a very discreet, like, oh, what do you want? Instead of why do you want it, or how is that going to work? You're not as much of a problem solver because you have the people dictating what the problem is to you, and there's 5 levels between you and the actual problem. And that's not a great way to, as an attorney, where you're trying to solve problems, be a good problem solver and a big term thinker. So I would advise anyone going to the law, really try to avoid becoming what I call a box checker, because box checkers tend not to be good lawyers. They tend to be very too discreet and too limited in their thinking. And I actually also don't necessarily like people who've been at a place that's too big or been sort of too limited in their thinking early on, because I find it's very hard to train them out of it. I'd almost just rather have a brand new person where I can train them how to think.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And diversity of thought is huge.
Yeah. And there's a great book on that called Range. I think it's by David Epstein, Why Generalists Triumph in a World of Specialization, which totally makes that point. The more experiences you have, the more analogical thinking you do, which is entirely what you need for problem solving for unique problems you haven't seen before. You really need analogical thinking, and it's very important for attorneys. So that is a fantastic point. Amy, I don't think I've seen anyone make it before, but totally agree with that.
One of the quotes that actually the general counsel of Mars, the M&M company, told me once. We were talking, and he goes, and I wrote this quote down. And when you said, Angie, when you said lawyers are like hired guns, he said to me one time, and I'll never forget it. He said, lawyers are hired guns, but they're like guns. So if you don't know how to use a lawyer, don't use one, because you're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot. And I was like, that's just brilliant, because it's right. Like, you got to really know how to use a lawyer, and you don't really know how to do that until you've worked with a lot of them to see. And that's one of the things that I did when I was really looking at when I took my first GC role. It was, what kind of person do I want to be? And I did, I read a thing about, everybody needs a certain amount of people in their life, and different mentors might have different skill sets. You might have one person that you think, oh, I like them. Why did you like them? Why do you think you like working with them? What's their characteristic that you thought was great about what they did? I had one attorney that worked that I just thought Terry Oxford, Cecilin Godfrey, the best trial attorney I've ever seen, one of the best. And I was like, why is he so good? And it came down to, he was personable. He could talk to a judge and a jury member, and it was exactly the same. He treated the paralegal and, you know, the valet guy and, you know, the president exactly the same. And so then taking those things that you look at other people and go, God, what was cool about them, and trying to emulate that as best you can. There was another attorney that taught me something that I also tell everybody that's ever worked for me. I have an open door policy, but that is conditioned on GTS. And they always said that they would put that on my tombstone one day. And at first people would go, what's GTS? And I said, Google that shit. You can come to my office, open door policy, as long as you can't GTS. But if you can GTS and you're coming in and interrupting what I'm doing, you know, for that, then you're automatically, people just get annoyed. So do as much of your own internal research and investigation before you go into your partner, before you go in to somebody for an interview, before you do any of that, because you don't want to ask in an interview, so what do you do? Or like, you know, Google that shit. It's all over the internet, you know. You want to ask, your questions need to be things that you can't find on the internet. The questions that you can't get by reading their SEC filings. Reading filings, there's inside law, there's a lot of different places you can go. And if you're interviewing for a company or even a law firm, you can look up deals they've done. You can look up contracts they've done with clients. And so, you know, I was able to say to one company, oh yeah, no, I saw in 2018 you guys did a deal with so-and-so. Are you still working with them? Oh, you saw that? Yeah, it was in the SEC filings. Oh, yeah. You know, stuff you can't find on the internet, or you can still find it on the internet, but not on just their webpage. That's something that always impressed me so much when people were interviewing, when they knew things that weren't obvious. So yeah, tell yourself that if you're going into an interview and you answer a question or you ask a question that you could GTS, it's over.
I think we've got time for probably one more question. Butch, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Amy, as a CLO, or in some instances as a GC, do you find yourself taking a more delegatory role or a more managerial role versus acting as an attorney?
The answer is yes, very, very much so. So there, you know, a lot of people have asked, what's the difference between a general counsel and a CLO? They're two different things. Sometimes companies call them the same, but they're two different companies. I'm general counsel for one company. I'm chief legal officer for another company. The general counsel can report into the CEO, but doesn't always report into the CEO. They might report into the COO, the CFO. And so in that situation, you may not have as much managerial as the CLO. Then again, you might. There are some general counsel that have tons. The chief legal officer really is a title that, you know, years ago, general counsel started, you know, really fighting for title changes. And because if you are a chief legal officer, that automatically designates and says that you're on the C-suite. You report to the CEO and or the board, and you are one of the corner executives that's running the business. But also what comes along with the CLO versus the GC is you have to be more of a business-oriented person. So, you know, getting up to speed on whatever the business is and what makes the money, right? What makes the money? Where are the pain points? That is incredibly important to do, is just to know the business and you need to do it regardless, but usually CLOs manage more people than a lot of times. But it's, yeah, you have to have managerial skills. And you have to know the kind of people that you work well with and the kind of people that you don't. And you have to just be real honest. And I was always very honest with people. If it wasn't working out, I was never a jerk. I would just say, hey, I don't think you want to be this type of attorney. You're miserable. Like, you hate it. And the job's not changing. So, you know, and most of the time they'd be like, and I'm like, your work product is good, but you're miserable. Figure out what you want to do. You know, you've got a job here until you figure it out. And 9 times out of 10, people at first, after they got through the shock, were like, thank you so much. Now I'm going to do so-and-so, and I'm not going to be doing tariff law, you know, I'm going to be doing something else. And it's really what I want to do. And so just give yourself, if you're not happy doing something because you just know long-term, now it doesn't mean it's not hard work. We all do shit that we don't want to do. And you have to grind. You have to grind. But, you know, if you know that it's not what you want to do long-term, the quicker you jump, the better. I am not one of those people that tells people stay someplace for 5 years just to say stay someplace for 5 years. It's a different world now. If you're someplace for a year and you realize that's not what you need to be doing, Eric just said he loves tariff law. Okay, I know who I'm calling, Eric. I've got a tariff question. But so, you know, it kind of depends. But if I'm a true believer in, it's much better to get a great recommendation and move on to something you like than stay someplace just to have the years on the resume.
Awesome. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy, for all of your time. I learned a ton in this. I didn't really know very much about the GC or CLO role, you know, when I was in law school. I think it's a very rare opportunity that people would get to hear about this, because I know that's definitely not one of the main career paths that a lot of law schools push. So, so I'm really, really glad to have you here today. Thank you for your time. And yes, please, everyone, you know, reach out to Amy afterwards, connect with her. And I will be sending out a link once this recording is posted, and by email. And I will also send out all of the LinkedIn links that you guys put here. So if you want, I'll just wait for 2 minutes while you guys drop your LinkedIn links in the chat box. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Tomorrow we're doing a virtual happy hour at 4 p.m. Central Time, and all attorneys, law students, prospective law students are invited, so feel free to come to that. That one's really social. It's really fun. We do 30 minutes of introduction.
I'll be there. I'll join.
Yeah, 30 minutes where you're in breakout rooms. The breakout rooms are really fun. You get to meet one other person, get to know them well. We invite everybody to take a selfie with their new buddy, and then you come back into the main room and you share it, and we all talk about one new fact about your new buddy that you learned. And it's good times. So please come participate, and it was great having you all here today. Thanks so much, Amy.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.